Well, welcome back. Like I said, I'm really excited about this plenary. We're going to feature a bunch of people talking about how feedback can support radical change. One of the biggest questions, the most common questions that I get at feedback labs is, what happens if people tell us they want things that we can't do? What if they tell us something that just is like way outside what we are willing or comfortable doing? We're going to hear now from a couple folks who face that exact question, face that challenge, that heard things that maybe were different from what they expected, heard things that were outside the scope of what they were planning to do, and we're going to learn a little bit about either how they did that or how they're in the process of doing that. We have kind of an exciting format today. So we're going to have a couple of lightning talks and then 2 conversations that you're going to be able to sort of listen in on, and we will, as always, have time for questions at the end. So we're going to hear from Lindsay and Monet, who are going to take us through some unexpected feedback that their organizations received and how they pivoted to be more responsive to those needs. Then we'll hear them in conversation. Then we'll hear 2 more lightning talks from Alana and Allison, who are in the middle of that transformation. And we're going to have a chance to hear how they're navigating that process again, and then have a conversation with them. So without further ado, Lindsay Church will be our first lightning talk speaker.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Lindsay Church. I am waiting for there we go. I am the executive director and co-founder of Minority Veterans of America. I use they, them pronouns. I am a 3rd-generation military veteran. I came from a long line of service. My mom served, my grandfather before her, and 6 or 7 members of my family have served, including one that's currently in service. I served as a linguist in the Navy and spoke Persian Farsi from 2008 to 2012. I served under the military's policy of don't ask, don't tell. The military taught me a lot of things. It taught me to listen to people. It taught me the importance of building coalitions and of the value of inspirational and transformational leadership. After separating from the military, I returned to Seattle, Washington, and I found my way into veteran organizing. First as a student veteran, founding a student veteran unit at the University of Washington that still stands today and serves 3,000 to 4,000 military-connected students every year. I also was a post commander of an American Legion post, a 100-year-old military organization in Seattle, Washington. So 2017 came around, and the world was changing around us. We saw the beginning of the Women's March. We saw the Muslim ban. We saw the trans ban. And 12 days later, we started our organization. Along with one of my best friends, Catherine Pratt, who went to the University of Washington with me, a Korean-American woman veteran, myself as a trans, queer veteran myself, we decided that it was time for change and that we had to find a way to come together. There were many organizations in the military community that served minority veterans, but they only did so with one population. And so we said that we needed to create an intersectional movement of minority veterans if we were going to create change. So we built an organization that serves racial ethnic minorities, women, LGBTQ folks, and religious and non-religious minorities so that we can create voice for our community. We've always been a community-powered and community-driven organization. We design our own solutions in our organization. Most of our members are veterans themselves. Our volunteer leaders are mostly veterans themselves. Our staff is all veterans, queer, people of color, military-connected spouses. We lead our own solutions around MVA. So in 2019, I took a chance. My wife told me she was moving to Richmond, Virginia, and I said I probably ought to go with you. So I left my job at the University of Washington, and I took a chance, and I planted a flag in the sand. I said, I have a strat plan in mind, and I'm going to make MVA the premier organization for minority veterans around the country. And then the lovely word that we all know, COVID. Our friend COVID came around. So COVID brought unique challenges. As a small, young organization, we were about 2.5, 3 years old at the time, and we had about 700 members going into it. We were a very small organization and very underfunded to do exactly what we needed to do, which was change the world. No big deal. We also knew that our communities were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Whether this be that our community was more likely to work in the service industry, more likely to lose their jobs, more likely to be single parents, more likely to need childcare, more likely to experience food insecurity, and the list goes on and on and on. So At the same time, the world was also realizing that COVID didn't change much. It just brought to the surface the problems that already existed. So what do we do in times of drastic change? So I had 4 options. Fight. I could fight and plant a flag in the sand and say we know best and we're just going to stay the course. Flight. I could run away from the problem and pretend it didn't exist, but here we are almost 3 years later, and we all know COVID still exists. I could freeze, stop everything that we're doing, and just wait it out. Our communities would suffer in the interim if we didn't act quickly. And my last chance was to start over. And so that's exactly what we did. We decided that we didn't know what we didn't know, and rather than fight change, we had to be willing to take this change and see where our community wanted us to go. So where does change happen? For us, change is everything that we're trying to achieve. And so as a change movement, we had to figure out how do we ensure that our voices are all being heard here and that our priorities reflect what's happening most in people's lives. The first 2 things that we inserted were voice and agency. First and foremost, communities need voice in their own movements. They need to be empowered to speak. They need to be able to give inputs into the services that we provide. We also needed to give agency. Sometimes this looks different. As social services, I'm seeing some nods in the room, how many times have you heard, we can't give direct cash to the community because they will spend it frivolously? We heard these things, these tropes, the same thing that we had heard over and over again. And so we had to say, actually, they need direct cash because some people need to pay their light bills. Some people need to pay their mortgage. Some people need to go buy groceries and diapers. It's not for me to tell you what you need. It's for you to tell me what you need and for me to find a way to deliver. So we inserted agency, and we said, whatever you need, tell us. We'll find a way. What did that create? That created buy-in. That created buy-in from the community that they wanted to come in. And most importantly, it created adoption. Oftentimes, we don't think about how our communities are going to adopt our programs when we build them. We just think we need to do a thing, and we're going to give it to people the way that we designed it. Actually, that results in people not wanting to use your services. And when they do, they don't retain. You have to be looking at adoption first and how your community is going to uptake those programs to be able to make sure that they're successful, because otherwise your programs will fall flat. All right, so what did we do? We turned towards collaborative innovation. We started with listening. We surveyed our members, we looked at our own internal strategies, and we said, for us, what is our perception of what the most urgent needs are? We looked at our strategic plan. We looked at our plans that were going forward for 2019, 2020, 21. All of those things, we looked at what do we think the needs are? And then we asked our community, what did you think the needs were? And so they told us something completely different. And so we had to look at, do those values, do those needs align, and are we delivering what they want? Sorry, I'm 1 minute, so I'm going to go very fast. Oh, I should probably switch the page. All right, so I'm going to skip forward to my key takeaways. All right, so first and foremost, communities know what they need best. Folks know their experiences, and just because we're from the communities that we serve doesn't mean that we know the solutions that they need. Everybody was experiencing the pandemic, and many people were experiencing it differently. We didn't need to be prescriptive, we needed to be responsive. We didn't need to tell them, we needed to respond to what they told us. They told us that their greatest needs were and how they were changing as time went along. Second, voice and agency are tools for creating buy-in and adoption. You need all 4 to create trust. When communities feel heard and considered in programming and program design and improvement, they're more likely to use your services and retain. Third, a plan is only as important as those who will use it. Best laid plans, we all know what they say about them. They only help the folks when they're designed for what folks need most. Even when I think that I know best from the 30,000 foot perspective, it's only as valuable as if I can meet base needs for them to buy into my vision. And last, sometimes the greatest gains come when you hit pause. Had we not taken a chance and changed everything, we might have missed the moment in time that we got to dig deep, to learn about our community, and to embrace the growth of our movement. We shifted our power and shared it among our community and our organization. As a result, our membership grew by 200% in 1 year, by 300% in 2. We received over 1,400 applications for our COVID fund. We started with 700 members at the beginning of the pandemic. As a result, we also distributed over $100,000 in aid through food insecurity programming, through direct financial relief, and we were able to serve more folks through our pandemic relief fund than we had ever served as an organization. So my favorite part of all of this is that we had laid a strong foundation so that when George Floyd was murdered, when Vanessa Guillen was murdered, our community had its base needs met so that we were on the front line of change. Minority veteran organizers were out in Richmond, DC, San Antonio on the front lines of change because our base needs were met going into it. We had used a base building strategy that empowered our community to be on those front lines. And most importantly, we didn't just become the premier organization for minority veterans. We became the organization that minority veterans knew that they could trust when the world fell apart. Thank you.
Clicker. Thank you so much. Next, we have Monet Holder from Florida Rising.
Good afternoon. I don't think I've used a real microphone in about 2 years, so this is weird, but good afternoon. My name is Monet Holder. I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Programs at Florida Rising. I know Florida Rising might be a name many of you have not heard before, and that's because about 1 year ago, on January 1, Florida's grassroots powerhouse organizations, New Florida Majority, which is the legacy organization I come from and I worked for about a decade, and Organized Florida, united as one to advance our ability to build power that centers Black and brown communities. So Florida Rising is essentially an independent political organization bringing together Black and brown communities to seize power and govern to advance social, economic, and racial justice across the state of Florida. Florida Rising presence now spans across 4 regions, 11 counties with 12 regional offices. We have a team of 85 staff members, which is huge, well, at least for us, 1,200 active dues-paying members, 2,896 volunteers, 10,416 activists, 284 leaders, over 100,000 supporters, and 35 members trained as facilitators across the state. So, thank you. But in 2021, when Florida Rising was birthed, we had several factors that came into play when we were developing our organizational strategy. First of all, we were a new staff family, and you know when you meet cousins that you never knew before, it's a thing. We had merged membership base, so with the legacy organizations, New Florida Majority was predominantly in North Florida and South Florida. Organized Florida was in Central and West Florida, so it was an awesome opportunity to be statewide, but our members didn't know each other, so we had the work of doing relationship building not only as a staff, but for our membership and doing it virtually. So y'all can imagine what that looked like. And we were still in the midst of a global pandemic, and Black and brown folks across the state were being hit in every direction, really across the nation. We had attacks on voting rights. We had the loss of life at the hands of law enforcement in some places. We had unsafe living conditions, and we had severe lack of affordable housing and disproportionate access to health care and to services. So in our minds as an organization, we had planned out 4 specific buckets of work that we would take up: climate justice, reproductive justice, criminal systems reform, and expanding democracy. Those were buckets of work that we thought were great. There's a lot of work to do in the community around those, and it still is. But we found that in conversations that our organizers were having, our grassroots organizers, either in one-on-one meetings with people that they met out in the field, in their regional meetings that they were hosting virtually, that there was still something or many things that folks had on their hearts and minds that we needed to address as an organization. Because we believe in member ownership. So we don't have a campaign, we don't have a program, we don't have any body of work if our members aren't bought into it and the community isn't bought into it. I can't run or win a campaign by myself, even though sometimes I think that I can. And what sets us apart from many of our partners, we work with advocacy groups, we work with lawyers, but we have base. So if our base isn't happy again, then what are we really doing? So we have this thing called People's Assemblies. We usually do them monthly by city or region, But every year we have a statewide People's Assembly, and we thought, what does this look like for our inaugural assembly as Florida Rising, to not only roll out who we are, introduce folks to each other, get their opinion on the issue areas that I mentioned earlier, but really hear from folks, what can we do or how can we lead as an organization? So we said, well, we don't want to overthink it. We can just ask folks to vote on what it is we should be focusing on. Easy enough, right? Democracy, expanding democracy. So we made it a thing. We worked hard, prepping our members for what this process would be, and brought them all into a virtual room. And the thing that came up as the top voted issue was affordable housing or housing justice overall. Okay, cool, right? So what does that mean for us? It meant a lot. So as far as infrastructure changes, we didn't have funding for housing, right? That wasn't something we raised money for. We didn't have a dedicated housing staff as we have for other issue-based organizations. We have campaigners for each issue. Housing, we did not, and we still do not. The job description is posted on our website. But I think, as I heard in one of the breakout sessions earlier, the biggest failure is to hear what people want change and not act on it. So we had to act on it. We called this meeting. You all voted. We said we were going to do something, so we had to make it work. Our organizers on the ground kicked into action. They started organizing around housing. We know that, as people say, all politics or all things are local. So we worked to come up with local changes and platforms that we wanted to see around housing justice in the state. As we prepared for legislative session, we worked on things we wanted to advocate for at the state level, and what were things we really wanted to push for on a federal level or overall changes when it came to housing and security. And then there's that word resources. So we actively started to seek resources to help fund our work in housing, not only in the immediate year, but what we can do for long term, because housing wasn't going to go away in 1 year. We had to commit to this being a long-term change, a long-term priority for the organization. And then as partnerships and allies, because even as an organization with members, we still can't do this work alone. And we've become leaders in the Florida Housing Justice Alliance space. I have 1 minute. So as we are still working, fast forward to 2022, we have come up with our campaign called Justice on Every Block. So we're building a base of tenants, Black folks, Latinx folks, returning citizens across the state to demand justice on every block. And for us, that starts with safe, affordable homes, rent control, and development that doesn't displace us. So as you learn the name Florida Rising, you will also see justice on every block, because that is something that we are looking for, not just in affordable housing, but in every part of the state as it relates to Black and brown folks in Florida. Thank you so much.
Now we're going to have Monet and Lindsay in conversation. I know that when we were planning for this session, they found a lot of similarities between the type of work that they were doing, and yeah, so come on, join the group.
I'm coming. That doesn't sound good.
Hi.
Hi, Lindsay.
All right, so I have a list of questions, but I am not going to ask them. Is that okay?
Take it easy on me, please.
Fantastic. So I listened to your talk, and we had a chance to chat a little bit before all of this. And you all do amazing work, and you do it for a lot of people, which is absolutely incredible. And you tackle really big issues. And I think, we have a long list of policy priorities ourselves. And so at some point, we had to pivot some of the policy priorities to implement COVID into the strategy. And how do you manage when you have major issues you're already tackling, when your community says, hey, actually, this is a bigger need right now?
So we're still figuring that out. I think overall, what we've always tried to do in our work is to outline strategic points or strategic issue areas, but we always leave space for rapid response, because outside of housing, there are things that are going to come up that as a grassroots organization we have to respond to and be in relation to. And we just have to make it work. But we lean on not just the capacity of our staff, but the capacity of our members and those who are directly impacted to take action. So it's not just me as the senior director of blah blah blah. It's our community leader, our regional leaders who can take action and build up within the community to take it on. So that creates increases our bandwidth within itself.
I love that. I think, in our work, we found when we shifted our power and shifted the way that we talked about our work and who was talking about our work, we found new issues that we needed to rapidly respond to, but we also had more volunteers than we've ever had in our history that were like coming out and saying, hey, I feel empowered by your mission, your vision, and I believe in your values, and like I bought in, and now I want to be on the front lines of change, and I want to be a part of that leadership, and I want to be out in my communities. And so like when you pivot, it's terrifying. Like you already have, like I said, really big priorities, but at some point, like you find more investment from your community. And did you all see like an increase in volunteership and when you shifted?
So absolutely. On the other side of things, we are very metrics and data driven. So we take a look at the numbers as far as how many people are taking action with us, how many people are opening our emails or doing digital actions. And when we really honed in on things around housing justice, we did see an increase, not only in our membership, people wanting to become members of Florida Rising, dues paying members, people taking action, and even now with the amount of folks who have an interest in coming to Tallahassee with us and advocating on housing has increased over the last year. So some of it has to do with people's comfort level a little bit, but definitely I think we've tapped into an issue that people feel resonates with them on a day-to-day. So I have a question for you.
Yeah, I have an answer for you.
So at any point in listening and making shifts, were there any pushback that you encountered from anyone within your ecosystem? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Well, I have a brand new board.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. I think it was, one, COVID was happening so fast, and I think having to make so many shifts so quickly, especially when your board is like more used to formal structures and data-driven solutions and all of the things that like we didn't have access to right away. And it was really scary that we were on a path that we were headed towards hiring an executive director, and that got pushed back 2.5 years. And at that point, for me, I spoke up and advocated for myself. I said, my community is suffering more than I am, and so it's important for me not to draw a salary for 2.5 years and make sure that we distribute $100,000 in aid to the community, because that mattered more. And so I stood my ground, and some folks, didn't love it, but when we started to see the results of it, it was some of the most powerful work we've ever turned out.
Awesome.
We also have a brand new board that is very much more activist and organizer focused, that sees financial distribution of redistribution of wealth and resources as a community solution rather than an expense on a line item.
And what, sort of a follow-up to that, what advice would you give organizations that are rooted in community, doing good work, but are afraid of mutual aid, right? Because of all of the things that go along with it, or just the management of it. Do you have any advice you would give? I
mean, I think that people have pulled this issue apart a lot, right? That somebody was talking about social determinants of health and like the different ways that we have to look at things. And so I think, one, there's a lot more information out there, and I think part of it is like, how do you formalize education so that people can see why we do wealth distribution? I found people are more likely to adopt when you tell them why. And I think you also have to have the right people in place. Like when you're implementing a movement building strategy with people, for me, I was, working with lieutenant colonels and like folks that are very used to government structures. And so there comes a friction point in your work sometimes where your vision, where you're headed, is different than the people that are in your leadership positions. And sometimes that comes with a conversation with a board member or a leadership team that says, this is where we're headed, and this is why, and the community wants this, and you can either get in or stay behind. But we can't keep having this friction point. So we have a almost entirely new board. Every board member, jumped in because they saw what we were doing and believed in it. And so I think If you're running into friction and you have the ability to implement your own voice and agency, is to advocate for people to be involved in your work that have a vision and values alignment with what you're doing. I know I have a little bit of privilege in the fact that I'm the executive director and the co-founders, but there is a point where you have the ability to insert your agency and say, this is actually better for the community, and that data, that survey, like that feedback is how you do it.
So this is a personal question.
No.
Where did you get, how did you get so comfortable or trained in having these tough conversations, or these courageous conversations, as we like to call them?
Extreme vulnerability. I nearly died in service. I'm from the military.
Right.
I got hurt really badly.
Okay.
And I ended up living in a medical barracks in San Diego, California, and was interacting every day as a wounded warrior with people who were coming back with amputees and had recently been blown up, and it really shifted my perspective. And then getting out of the military, I learned Farsi in the Navy, and I got home and I went and did a Persian program or Iranian studies at the University of Washington, and I could tell you how to get on the ground, how to do a checkpoint language. I could tell you everything about a bomb, but I couldn't tell you how to make a bed. And so I started to see where the gaps in my understanding were and started to see where I needed to shift perspective, and that was a revolutionary moment for me.
Nice.
Okay, so what about you, your power, and what friction points did you run into, and what do you have for advice, because I want to learn.
So the friction point was really throwing away what we thought was a pretty darn good plan and starting over, right? Coming into it, prior to the official merge, we spent a lot of time, especially on the director level or the senior director level, planning what Q1 would look like, right? We weren't going into it fresh. We thought we knew what we were going to do. We thought we had buy-in from the ground up, right? Because the top-down approach is not what works in community organizing at all. So we had that. We had a pretty plan. We had graphics. We had a PowerPoint.
I had graphics.
Y'all know how graphics make you feel. And that was okay, but we didn't have anything specifically. We already knew housing was a thing, right? We have supported others in that fight. The traditional support, sign-on letters, we'll go with you to tell us, we'll do things, but it's different when it becomes a priority, right? And you need to have that same treatment as everything else. So we needed to do that, and we needed to do that quickly. So that was okay, so what are we gonna do? Type thing, and then starting for the folks who weren't in that voting meeting, bringing them with us. We had staff members who just felt how is this going to get done? So really just taking the time to work plan and think through how do you do this while maintaining work-life balance while still holding your buckets of work. So it took time, and we're still working through it. We are fortunate enough to have a board that not only has leaders who come from this space that we're in, so they understand the work, they understand having to shift focus and being responsible. We also have grassroots members who are part of our board, really a part of our board, have voting power on our board, so they already knew. So that part was easy peasy. It was just actually operationalizing a brand new plan very quickly. That was the hardest part.
Okay, I have 2 questions on that, and I love all of it. Okay, so one, you talked about rapid response, and I think as funders and nonprofits, I think this is really important. Vanessa Guillen was murdered in the middle of everything, and we had to figure out how are we going to mobilize with $0. And I think, one, the reserves for quick reaction is really hard to find, and funders looking at quick reaction funds is really important because we, as organizers, have to be able to respond to the needs in our community rapidly, and we can't wait for the next quarter's grant cycle. Don't have time for that. So I'd love to hear your strategy around making sure that your community has voice through rapid response, and I love that you have a community member on your board.
We have 3.
Yes! I'd love to hear it.
So rapid response. So we actually plan and budget for rapid response. As I mentioned, in our legacy organizations, both were around for over decades. So we have learned the lesson of not planning for rapid response. and
We're
the
still
impact that it has. So not only like the funds to mobilize and do so, but like the communications capacity to do so, because communicating around what you're doing is the most important, because if nobody knows, then did it really happen, you know, type thing. And then just having a group of folks, directly impacted folks who know if and when it's time to mobilize, I need you to be able to take action. So we worked really hard to build that infrastructure. It wasn't overnight, and sometimes it still doesn't work out perfectly depending on where we are in the moment, but it just takes like time and planning and failing at rapid response to get it right.
Yes. I also love that you just said that you have 3 members on your board, and I think that is actually really neat, because oftentimes you see on boards, you see a token, and you know that that person has no ability to create power, and that's like the hardest part, is like you get people who want to put one minority voice on the whole panel, and they don't understand that there's no power building in that. And so having 3 creates more of a voice and a voting block that like allows for more agency and more power sharing in the actual movement that you're building. I'm going to stop shaking paper at you, I promise. But it allows for that, you know, ability to create majorities. And did you leverage that in the ways that you were kind of shifting your whole strat plan?
So yes. Well, to be a board member, you're also a member of the organization, but our board members are in deep community with our members, right? Because they came from the membership. The membership voted to have those board members represent them. So it didn't take a whole lot of, I guess, convincing, if that's
Coming up with an old word, cajoling, is that a thing?
or something. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. Yeah, they came from our membership, so it was a smooth transition. I don't know. Are we out of time?
How much time have we gotten? We have 1 question. All right. How did you learn your voice, and how did you it's not easy, especially when you're not like the sole, you know, decision maker. How did you, within the structures that you all had, find that agency, that voice to be able to advocate for an extreme shift in, especially policy priorities, because you're a movement, So
I'm still finding my voice, right? I'll be transparent about that. Depends on the day, depends on the
Aren't
year.
we all?
No, but honestly, I recognize the privilege and my position within the organization. I serve in our executive leadership team. I, oversee our campaigns department, all the things. But I guess my superpower has been how I uplift others, right? And I try not to ever be the smartest person in the room.
That's the dumbest plan you can have.
Right, so regardless of title, whether it's my organizer or my colleague who supports my calendar, they all know more than me. So there's never a time where I'm not listening to them, or they're not, giving me the ideas that I need to use in a space that maybe folks aren't in. And I never really go anywhere without a member of the community with me.
I think I really want to be friends with you.
We can be friends after this. I think we have each other's email. So yeah, that's how I found my voice.
I love that. I also love the idea of empowering others and not being the only one in the room. I mean, as decision makers and leaders, we have the opportunity to open the door, which invites that buy-in. And when you uplift others, you empower others to speak, and not so that you're not the only one in the room that's saying a thing that might be unpopular or challenging. And so I love that you open the door for others, because that's what we got to do.
It's my responsibility.
Same.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks.
Big thank you to Lindsay and Monet for that great conversation, that great lightning talk. We have 2 more lightning talks and another conversation for you, so good luck to the next folks for following that. And next we have Alana Forte from Jacksonville University.
Good afternoon. So we're going to start with feedback is a gift. Do you remember this? Feedback is a gift? I remember the first time I heard it, it was a couple decades ago, when I thought, feedback is pain. Are dental appointments gifts? So what are we qualifying? I was the type of person that when someone said, let's talk, I had great anxiety. And so for me to be in front of you today to talk about the actual talk as a gift, I just want you to know feedback evolves and we come a long way. It's never a pretty package, there's never a bow. I'm not gonna give you a receipt so you can't return it if it doesn't fit. But feedback is mission critical in our global marketplace to make sure we are successful, we strive, and we do our best work. And so I am legal counsel for Jacksonville University, and a part of my job every single day is giving and receiving feedback. I manage compliance, and so much of the feedback I give is pretty. It lives on the four corners of a document, and it's policy, and it adjusts, and it keeps people out of trouble, and it saves things, and everybody's comfortable with it. But in the wake of what I think is 40 years, which has actually been 2 years since 2020, I've also been gifted the Department of Human Resources. And yes, you may know it by the stigma, and I apologize for the trauma of HR. And so I've learned the most important thing about feedback is valuing the listener. So in absorbing human resources, we did a survey to everyone. No one wanted to come to the Office of People and Culture. No one wanted to come to HR. And we said, why? And they said, we don't trust you. So I thought no one hated or mistrusted a department more than legal and compliance, but I was wrong because it's actually HR. And so they said, start by not being HR. And so we listened to the provost who gave this very mean feedback. And we accepted it. And it's been the best thing we've ever done because we changed our name to the Office of People and Culture. And not only did it change my staff from being the culture of the DMV and why are you here? What do you need, right? But it allowed us to reinvent ourselves and really focus on the people and the culture. And so I'm gonna start with just really using the key as value the listener. Speak the listener's language, talk and work in an environment where I would say the listener understands, but you have to acknowledge history. So feedback started in corporate America. Feedback started in education. Let's acknowledge that. Those are very traditional systemic frameworks in our society. What else does it do? It hasn't been known to serve minorities well, historically marginalized groups, any groups that's been disenfranchised, first-generation Americans, immigrants, and, English as a second language. There's so many disadvantages in just the lens of feedback. We have to acknowledge that. And so it reminded me of when I was in law school, and I made trial team, and I went to the #1 trial advocacy school in the nation. So being on trial team was like being in the World Cup from a global lens or being on University of Florida's football team. It was a big deal, and there was an honor. And so as my trial team coach met with me, it was a very vanilla law school, as many law schools were many, many years ago. And she said, okay, all right, so let's make sure we wear our hair back and straight and in a bun and make sure it's clean and neat and tidy. And I was the only person that looked like me. And I thought, this does not get straight or neat or tidy. It can be professional any day of the week. But the lens of what professionalism looked like then was a little bit different. And I realized the lens of feedback is very vanilla. And now we're living in a demographic shift. And in the next 10 to 15 years, our population is going to be majority minority. But the history of feedback has been very, very vanilla. And so there's an adjustment that we need to make in giving feedback. And it brought me back to that moment. And it reinvented, I need to teach our employees, our staff, our students, how to communicate in a global marketplace when everyone doesn't speak the same language as you or equate pretty or neat to the same definition. And that's something that was really, really, really important. Now remember, this is 2020, so colleges and universities, we pride ourselves on preparing students for the global marketplace. And you will be ready for jobs that do not exist yet, for majors that have not been created. But what does that mean? It means that every single problem we have in our society is on our campus. So political tensions, Biden, Trump, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, COVID, everything was on our campus. I want to wear a mask. I don't want to wear a mask. You must mandate the vaccine. You better never mandate the vaccine. And all this feedback was coming, and we had to adjust mid-flight. And so we really took in the feedback of everyone. We did surveys. Some people wanted to speak up. Some people weren't comfortable speaking in a town hall or a forum or a Zoom meeting. And so we did surveys. Some people wanted to do the surveys, but they didn't trust the process. So we did anonymous surveys, and we listened to everyone. And we gave them the results. We had to make policy, and sometimes everyone's feedback could not be a part of the new policy, but every single stakeholder knew that they were a part of the algorithm to get to the solution. And so even in coming back to the workforce, 1 minute, that was quick. Even in coming back to the workforce, we really were very integral to what people wanted. We wanted to show up for our students on campus, and we wanted to honor the remote work policy. We wanted to make sure that every student was served if they wanted to be served in person, but we wanted to honor health and safety of everyone and learn. We could do a lot not being on campus. And so every student-facing area works remotely 1 day a week. Everyone in the back office can work remotely 100% or hybrid. We had to adjust to make things work for the better of society, and we had to do it to make sure that students, they learn not just in the classroom, but most importantly, outside of the classroom. And we did this in many different ways, and I look forward to talking about it on the panel because I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Our last lightning talk, Allison Carlman from Global Giving. Come on up. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, thank you. There's a phrase, and there's a debate about who first said it. It definitely wasn't Stephen King, but some people will tell you Stephen King because he wrote it down somewhere. It wasn't Stephen King. It might have been William Faulkner. Some people think it was this guy that no one's ever heard of named John Q. Couch. The phrase, "kill your darlings," gruesome as it may be, is common advice now given to novice authors. It refers to this action of eliminating beloved characters, but unnecessary characters, or beloved storylines, but unnecessary storylines, because frankly, they've got to go for the sake of the overall story. The Accelerator program was a Global Giving darling. When Global Giving was created 20 years ago by Mari Qureshi and Dennis Whittle, two folks in the room somewhere, and some other folks in the room, Britt Lake, these folks started quickly learning that they needed to experiment with things that would incentivize donors and incentivize nonprofits. So this is the first global crowdfunding marketplace for nonprofits. And they experimented with things like campaigns and bonus funds and matching dollars and all of these things that would help get money moving in the marketplace. And it started to work. And then they consolidated all this learning into this accelerator program where 4 times a year, organizations would come together in a cohort and participate in a campaign where they would raise hundreds of thousands of dollars collectively. And it made sense, and it was working. It was working for nonprofits. They were getting new donors, and it was working for Global Giving because we were getting the fees from these donations, and so that was helping us cover the cost of vetting these organizations and helping us keep our own organization afloat. We got a lot of really good feedback. This is feedback from people who are able to participate. Someone here says, "I learned more about fundraising in these 3 weeks than I ever have over the last 7 years." We got tons of this great feedback from people who participated. Even if they didn't succeed the first time, even if they didn't meet their fundraising goals, they participated again because if they succeeded, then they could join Global Giving and be part of it. But we got some negative feedback too. You see, the accelerator had this goal where you had to raise $5,000 from 40 donors in a short period of time. It was something that everyone in the cohort participated in because we had learned that organizations learn best just by doing. But this person here said that treating organizations the same, irrespective of the leader's geography and capacity, is kind of unfair. And he wasn't the only person who thought that. So as we began to look deeper into our own issues around race, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and as we conducted some primary research about community-led, which was at the heart of our new mission statement, we started to finally engage with the data and see what it wasn't showing. Here's what it wasn't showing. It wasn't showing that the types of organizations we wanted to serve, those community-led organizations, that they were even able to actually succeed. What it showed was that we were enabling the organizations with access to things like American donors with American credit cards. The people who already had that power, they were able to succeed. Folks who had access to maybe an American Peace Corps volunteer or somebody who could run their program, they were able to succeed. We saw that US-based organizations were succeeding at twice the rate of international organizations, and that wasn't what we wanted to see. We saw that organizations who posted projects on the Global Giving website were only succeeding at about 5 to 15% of them were able to succeed with meeting their fundraising goals. So that meant that our acceptance rates were on par with Harvard University. And finally, what we saw was that the people who had feedback to share who weren't able to succeed weren't even staying at the table long enough to give us that feedback. So we had to bring together all of this great positive reviews that we were getting from participants and reconcile it with what we weren't hearing and what we weren't seeing. And so the decision was clear. We had to end it. Look, we were getting really good at iterating and tweaking and saying, okay, if we can just do this, it'll be more fair, and if we do this, it'll be more easy. And look, the program really improved through iterations and tweaking. But it wasn't getting us fast enough or far enough towards our mission, our bold mission of transforming aid and philanthropy to accelerate community-led change. So we burned it down. We burned it down, and instead of creating something new in its place, we said, what if we ask the people who are most affected by this work to create the thing themselves? So, this was the first of one of our many experiments in radically sharing power. That community-led research that we had implemented and our commitment to diversity and equity and inclusion showed us quite clearly that if we want to accelerate community-led change, we need to become more community-led ourselves. So that would begin with sharing power and co-creating solutions with the people who are most affected. And that included people who were not impacted by our previous models. So, last week, this is literally us last week, look, there's me, I'm in Denver. Last week, we created our first co-creation participatory design studio. We got these folks together from all around the world for 16 hours over 4 days to co-create a new onboarding program for global giving, a new way to welcome organizations into global giving so that they could then access the benefits of being able to tell their story and get the training they need and participate in the campaigns. We had to make it easy for everyone to participate. First of all, we paid them to be there. Next, there were some folks who didn't have reliable internet, so we paid for Canaro to have a hotel room for 4 days in South Sudan so that he could participate. There were folks like Salma who didn't feel comfortable with the technology we were using, Zoom and Miro, and so we paid for Bakar to accompany her to be her tech support and also to offer his insight from his community. We had some Spanish speakers, and so we paid for live simultaneous translation for folks whose preferred language wasn't English. And we started at 6 a.m. my time so that we could be more respectful of folks, of Yolanda here who was participating from Indonesia. And so these are the ways that we made it possible for people to participate. And most importantly, We made a commitment even before we ran the sessions or knew the outcomes. We made a commitment to implementing the result at Global Giving. Okay, so we learned a lot over 4 days. We went through the entire participatory process with them. We started out with empathizing. We worked together to define the program. Then we ideated and brainstormed together. They even got to a place where they prototyped solutions and then critiqued them. We brought staff in to ask more questions and for them to iterate and finally get to a prototype solution. This is a screenshot of the Miro board from day 2. These are all the ideas that are forming here, and people are voting, and look at these speed sketching, people taking pictures with their phones and sending them up there. We did all of these things so you could see that this idea was starting to take shape, and it was scary for our team because we've already committed to this thing that we don't know what it looks like, and this is kind of what it looks like. But it also made 2022 planning really challenging because we were like, we've got to save a lot of money and time and resources for this thing. That looks like, it's going to look something like this. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but we have to commit to doing it, and so that's what we did. And so, you know, it was really resource intensive, and it was scary for our team to do this, and we did it anyway because we're committed to sharing power with the people we seek to serve. And so for us, going beyond feedback meant not just listening to our participants and not just looking at positive outcomes. It meant learning more about those folks who weren't able to participate at all. It meant comparing the outcomes that we saw with the boldness of the mission that we seek to achieve. It meant knowing when iterating and improving in a slow, steady rate just isn't enough. It meant knowing when to kill our darling so that together we could co-create something that was better for everyone. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allison and Alana. We'll have the two of our last two speakers in conversation. I'm sure it'll be a rich chat. Can't wait to hear it.
So Allison, I have questions. But first, I have a comment. You and your organization are so brave because when you have something so successful and you find that it's not aligned with your goals or your values, to have the integrity to start from scratch is pretty impressive. So I think that's something that should just be said.
Thank you for that.
So how do you cede control to, even if it's the groups that you serve, in a way that I consider brave, but many people consider scary? What does that commitment look like? What's that process?
Yeah, you know, we found that it was really our responsibility in setting up this participatory design studio. It took us 6 weeks to get to what is the right question. It meant looking through all of our data and all of our feedback from staff. Like, we had staff sessions to literally get to what is the question that we're going to try and solve. And also, what are the constraints that we're handing these designers? So we're not saying you have the whole world available. We're saying you have about $150,000 available. And we're saying it has to be a solution that's online. So it was up to us as the team that was setting up these designers to set them up really well so that they wouldn't end up creating something that then we're like, oh, I'm so sorry. That's beautiful, but we'll never be able to do that. Because that's not fair to the folks who's invested this time. And so that's what it was. It was us getting, the executive team on board with the design question, with the constraints, with the scope that we had set out, so that then we could hand it off to let something really beautiful happen and be okay with it.
That's great. So there seems to be a juxtaposition between the fundraising part of your work and really getting down into the communities that you serve. Is that a conflict of interest, and how do you justify that on every level, whether it's the stakeholders or also the leadership team that helps you, do this work?
Yeah. Well, honestly, we were at a place where financially we were able to take this risk, so I realized it's not going to be a possibility for everyone. And we took a big bet in saying that, look, So, you know, we'll still get fees going forward from organizations that are new and joining. And if we can get more organizations set up to be successful, our model is still going to work. So we had to take a break in that and say, look, we can widen the scope of who gets to play. And so it's a big bet. And honestly, like it just ended last Friday. I don't know how it's going to go. But that's the big bet we had to be willing to take to experiment with the sharing power.
I love the charisma around it's gonna go, we've done it. You mentioned it ended last Friday. When did you do the analysis to find out that all the work and the fundraising you had been doing wasn't actually helping the global population you intended to serve?
That was about 6 months ago.
6 months total. Okay.
Yeah. But I'm so thankful to have heard from you. And, you know, it's so interesting when I'm thinking about your story. You deal with similarly so many different stakeholders. So at a university, you have, you know, traditional folks like funders, and then of course you have students and everyone in between. How are you thinking about feedback for all of those different people? What sort of mechanisms are you using for feedback to hear from folks that are very traditional and very non-traditional?
So that's a great question. Education is hundreds of years old, and so the system of education through the process of tenure is archaic. So if I told you today that I was going to hire you based on your credentials, your research, your talent, your pedagogy, everything that you've studied, and you're hired for life, no matter what you do and say, how would you feel about that? It would be a shock.
Sounds pretty great.
Right. It sounds great. So that's education, the historic framework of education, right? However, in our global marketplace, so much is shifting, and so it's almost like when you have an unstoppable force and an immovable object. We have faculty who grew up when I grew up in the 70s and 80s that basically say, I see no color. And we have students that are like, I need you to know that I'm a first generation Chinese Jamaican, my pronouns are she, her, hers, LGBTQGR. Like, we want to be seen and recognized in every space. And those two components are in one space. And so we want to honor and recognize and adjust and also respect the program that's built. So it's messy. It's messy in a way that creates something pretty beautiful. I think there's a way to honor history and people and programs and reinvent themselves, and we've had to do that. So as far as communications and dealing with some of our faculty, in 2020, some of them had never ever taught an online class. They never even logged on to an online portal. We had students that could teach an entire class from their phone. And so it was a huge learning process, a lot of training, a lot of investment, and we met everyone where they were. And I think that's really important to recognize is I remember a faculty member said to me, I shared a document and I used a YouTube video. And they were just so proud of themselves, and I was proud of them. But it lets you know where we were when it happened. So we had to use some traditional frameworks and also use technology in a way and invest in technology we didn't have to make it happen, to be beneficial for everyone on campus. And we're still doing that, so.
Okay, wow. And so how do you reconcile this idea of meeting everyone where they're at? But also I heard you say during your talk that everyone's feedback can't be implemented. So how do you reconcile these two different things?
So it's really important that today I want to be heard. You don't have to take any advice. You don't have to implement anything I'm saying or doing, but you're making really good eye contact even if you're faking it. And so I feel like I'm being heard. And I think for the majority of our stakeholders, they wanted to be heard. In the wake of 2020, prior to this, we thought all of our students were happy. But the cultural climate surveys informed us that a lot of our students felt that they weren't heard, they weren't seen, they weren't recognized, and in the most important place, in the classroom. And so it was important for us to hear things that may have been uncomfortable or painful, especially dealing with the majority of the reason why we're on campus, to serve our students and to educate. And we allowed them to educate us. Now, I'll tell you what was difficult in this process. The most difficult is for a lot of our students who felt marginalized, and rightfully so, the tradition, I think, in higher education is like, so let's fix it. What are you going to do about it? But the burden on society and the sensitivity and the trauma, that wasn't fair. That wasn't a course of action that we could actually deploy. So we had to invest in our faculty, our staff, experts to come in and build models and frameworks and plans to support students where they were, instead of saying, you fix it. And I think that was the best thing at the time, and I stand by it now.
Okay, they seem very lucky to have you as the people and culture person.
I don't know if they felt lucky in March of 2020.
I feel like I'm sensing a theme from stuff we've heard all day long is like, we thought everything was going fine. And then for some reason, we had to start asking different questions or looking a little bit deeper. And so I'm curious, in the wake of COVID, what are some of the tools that you use to hear from folks that you haven't heard from before? Maybe the ones telling you we're not fine.
Yes. We listened in every avenue we could possibly listen. So in writing, in town halls, in virtual sessions. Some people wrote articles, some people did research, they wrote white papers. Some people spoke to the president, some people spoke to our facilities crew. We listened to feedback in print, in pictures, in social media posts. There was no resource or medium off limits, because the point was, and the goal was, to be an office of people and culture. And so we weren't closing our eyes to a newspaper or a picture or even a 3-word social media post. We wanted to be, I would say, as available as we could. Now, our office was small, and so we asked everyone on campus to participate in the process. And today, the things we did as temporary fixes are implemented into our long-term strategy. So they were reactionary in many ways so we could adjust to the times, and they're things that we're going to do as long as they work. And I think that's what we learned. Before this, we always say, change for the sake of change is not great. But when you realize that you haven't changed in so long, and that you've been doing things and they're great, and the process is great, and you forget the reason why, then it's all being done in vain. And so this process of change has allowed us to be a lot more intentional in what we do and really define what is education. It is this university atmosphere where people come from all over the world with all different languages and backgrounds, and they share those experiences. And that's something that you can't placate or make up in just one class by one faculty member. So it's helped us be more dynamic in that. And actually, it reminded me of your focus session for the last couple days, because the intentionality in the interpreter and the times, and you being in mountain time at 6 a.m., that takes expressed intentionality. How did you know all the things to consider? Who did you consult? Like, what was that creation like? Because that wasn't on accident. That was pretty great.
Well, we asked the folks we wanted to involve, and we said, okay, how can we make this possible? And so we had one-on-one sessions with them and said, like, does this feel comfortable with you? Like, let's talk through what your challenges are. And so, like, we hadn't thought about the internet access thing for folks. And so, it was Kenaro's idea to ask for a hotel room. And it was like an immediate yes, because if we're going to pay someone for a translator, then it's a similar accessibility question. So, yeah, it was really just a matter of asking people what's going to make it possible for you to participate mindfully and to be able to really be part of this thing. And actually, people just told us themselves. And it was a very small group, so we were able to do it individually. We don't have such a massive group that you're working with, but that's how we were able to do it for that.
Well, I think a lot of us in here are in a process of doing better or continuous improvement in whatever we're working on, what's next for this process for you? Because I think we're all like, are we going to be informed? Are you sending an email to us? Like, what's next?
It's a great question. We're still trying to like name the thing, right? So we met on Monday after the session. We're like, what was their solution? Like, what are we calling it? And so that's like this week. We're working now in 2-week sprints. So this week is the second of the 2 weeks. We're naming the thing and we're assigning people to it. So yes, actually the first week of April is when we've committed to sharing with organizations. And I've heard that there's folks in the room who are, I know several of you are Global Giving nonprofit partners. Or if you're not yet, starting April 1st, we'll have a way for people to sign up. But we're also committed to building out this co-creation capability. So honestly, on Monday, we're having our next co-creation. We're working with a corporate partner who is open to the idea of co-creating a grant program with the grantees. And so we're facilitating with them. It's in Spanish, but we have the same interpreters just so that I can observe and understand in English.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Thank you so much. Now, big round of applause for that. What an awesome session. Thank you all so much.